What's happening, friends? Jazz trumpeter Bobby Spellman here to welcome you to the third episode in our jazz improvisation series. In the last 2.5 episodes, we've covered almost all of the theory that you will need to know in order to get started improvising over some of the most common chord progressions that you will find in many of your favorite jazz standards. Now today we will take the theoretical principles here and apply them to improvisation by bringing a rhythm section in and talking about the many different ways that you can choose to start navigating the most common chord progression in jazz, the 2-5-1. Now, before we get started here, I want to make the point that I will be speaking throughout this video in concert pitch. So if you are a pianist or a guitarist, or if you play the violin or the flute or the hammer dulcimer or any number of other concert pitch instruments, this will be very easy for you. But if you play a B-flat instrument like trumpet or tenor saxophone, you will have to transpose the whole thing up a whole step. So a B-flat major scale becomes a C major scale for you, for example. And if you are an E-flat instrument like alto saxophone or baritone saxophone, you'll have to transpose the whole thing up a sixth. I will also put a link in the description to a PDF that will cover many of the concepts that we talk about in this video. All right, gang, so we're gonna have a lot of fun today. And without further ado, let's dive in on this exciting episode of Theory with Bob. All right, gang, as promised, we're covering 2-5-1s today, and I have the pleasure of welcoming back to the studio Julia Chen on the piano, Julian Smith on the bass, and Evan Hyde on the drums. This excellent rhythm section will take us through the 2-5-1, and we're going to talk about a couple of approaches that will allow you to hear the chord changes and the voice leading through the chords and get a sense for how you can navigate through this chord progression, which then you can apply to many of your favorite jazz standards. So we're going to start off in the key of B-flat, a popular key, and we're going to start off with a tonic, the root chord of B-flat major. So if our tonic is B-flat major, that means that the 2 chord is going to be C minor 7, and it means that the 5 chord is going to be F7, which brings us back to B-flat major 7. Now, as an improviser, your first job is to get a handle on the various notes in the chords and the scales that you have to deal with. So my first recommendation is to be able to play the arpeggios, which is all the notes in the scale one at a time. So that might sound a little something like this. Whoops, I meant to say the arpeggios every note of the chord played one at a time. Here we go. Now, as I'm practicing these various exercises, the arpeggios and the scales, I like to put them in the rhythm of the chord progression so as to be able to reinforce the sound of the chords in my mind. So the value of learning the arpeggios is so that you really get a sense of where the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7 is of each of the chords. Now, all of the notes that we're dealing with here are all in B-flat major, but they all have a different role on each of the chords. So it's good to get used to what the sound of each of those notes is on each of the chords. So once you get a handle on the arpeggios, then your next step is to go on and to be able to play each of the modes in time with the chords. Now in this case, I like to play, if I've got 2 measures of the same chord, as is the case with the B-flat major 7, I like to play all the way up to the 9th and then back down, just for the benefit of the rhythm. Once again, that's going to sound like this. And that takes us back to the 1 once again. Now, once you get a handle on the various modes and the arpeggios over the chord progression, your next step is to be able to figure out the voice leading. So as we talked about in our last video, voice leading is the motion of one voice from one chord to the nearest voice in the next chord. Very often when chords are moving where the bass motion is in fifths, you will find that the thirds of one chord will move to the 7 of the next chord, and the 7 of one chord will move to the 3rd of the next chord. Not always the case, but you will often find that to be the case, and it certainly is the case here in this particular 2-5-1. So we're going to start on the 3rd of C minor 7, which is E flat, which is going to stay on E flat as the 7th of F7, and then resolve to the 3rd of B flat major 7. And that's going to sound like this. So as you get used to the sound of that voice leading, you'll gain a better understanding of being able to hear all of these chords and the changes as they're happening. So what I'm going to do is, now that I have a handle on being able to move from the E flat to the E flat to the D, I'm going to start playing around with the rhythm a little bit in order to be able to start improvising with this one line through the chord changes. Now that's going to sound a little something like this. All right, so we're already improvising here. We're just taking one note at a time, but as you go, you're going to be able to embellish that and include some more notes of the scale. And something like that might sound like this. So you can start to improvise little by little with these lines through the chord changes. Now, I'm going to take, instead of starting on the 3rd of the chord, I'm going to start on the 7th of the chord. So in this case, we're going to start on B flat in the C minor 7, which is going to go to the 3rd of F7, which is A, and then stay on A for the B flat major 7. And that's going to sound like this. So you can get a sense for the way that the voices move through the chords, and you can get a sense for certain melodies that you can use to navigate those particular voices. All right, so now that you get a handle on the voice leading from the 3rds to the 7ths and the 7ths to the 3rds, in order to be able to hear the chords and find new ways of navigating melodies through the chord progression, we're going to start first by creating bass lines. So this is especially helpful if you are, well, it's especially helpful if you're a bass player like Julian, but if you're a horn player or another melodic instrumentalist, it's also helpful to be able to do this for the benefit of being able to hear what the chords are. So I might start by just creating a line that connects the various bass tones, and that might sound like this. Now I'm just getting the sound of that one, the bass melody in my head. Once again, with all of these tunes, all of these chord progressions, your goal is to try to hear the various melodies that are moving through the chord progression. So we're starting with the bass, but from there you can move on and connect the 3rds to the 3rds. So once again, the 3rd of C minor 7 is going to be E flat. Now, rather than moving to the 7 of F7, you can take an opportunity to create a melody that will connect the 3rd of C minor 7 to the 3rd of F7 to the 3rd of B flat major 7, which is D. So because those thirds are all a bit of a wider interval apart from one another, it gives us the opportunity to play around with different melodies connecting them. So a very simple one might sound like this. So in that case, I'm connecting the E flat, walking up the scale, getting to the 3rd of F7, which is A, and then moving down to the D on B flat 7. B flat major 7, that is. Now, I can take that one idea and start to embellish that a little bit with different melodies and different notes. And that might sound like this. Same basic concept, but now I'm embellishing these melodies through the changes in order to be able to hear these different possibilities. Now in that case, you might have noticed that I used a couple of notes that are outside of the key, and in this case, those are called chromatic passing tones. So I can create a little additional tension, a little extra flavor with some chromatic passing tones that will get me from one tone in the chords to the next. And that sounds a little something like this. So as I'm getting from the various diatonic notes to the other diatonic notes in the chords, I can use those little chromatic passing tones to give it a little extra flavor. All right, so now, having played around with the thirds to the thirds, now I'm going to try to connect the sevens to the sevens. So in this case, I'm going to start on the 7th of C minor 7, which is B flat, moving to the 7 of F7, which is E flat, and then the 7th of B flat major 7, which is going to be A. And that's going to sound a little something like this. So now I'm playing around with a little bit about it, choosing whichever one I want to use, the thirds or the sevens, moving back and forth. Now once again, if I'm just doing the sevens to the sevens, that's going to give me a couple of simple lines that I can use. Once again, just as a demonstration, that's going to sound like this, going from the sevens to the sevens. Here we go. So as you go and as you get more and more used to the various possibilities of the ways that you can get through these various chords, that opens up all kinds of different creative opportunities to play around with the rhythms and the different intervals that you can play with and the various different kinds of alterations you can make to the chords, which we will talk about in later episodes. And you can really go about finding your own individual voice as an improviser by finding the ways that you prefer to be able to navigate these chords. So I'm going to play around a little bit just to give you a sense for the possibilities. All right, we're gonna take a minute. We're gonna have Julia Chen play a couple of 2-5-1s for you. Just navigate those chords. You got it, Julia. All right, and there you have it, gang, the 2-5-1 in B flat major. Now that can be applied to any number of various tonic chords. In all instances, you can have the 2 chord moving to the 5 chord, moving to the 1 chord. And as you practice these things, you can practice them through the various different tonic pitches, through the various keys, so you get a sense for the possibilities of the different ways you can navigate these chords. And there you have it, the 2-5-1. All right, gang, and there you have it, a couple of ways that you can think about navigating a 2-5-1. Now, you'll notice in this video that I focused primarily on the thirds and the sevens of the chords because those notes are the notes in the chord that most define the chord. And as you're practicing being able to hear the chord progression and being able to improvise over the chord progression, it helps very much to be thinking about the motion of the thirds and the sevenths. However, you can take these exercises and apply them to the fifths or the ninths or the 13s or whatever you want. What you'll find is the more ways that you can find to navigate the chord tones across the chord progression, the more creative you can be. And you'll find that no matter where you are in an improvisation, you'll be able to create a melody that gets you from one chord to the next. So the goal is always to just build your vocabulary by finding all these various paths through the chords and then using rhythm and timbre and your imagination to try to come up with many different ways of expressing yourself in that particular harmonic context. All right, gang, so if you would like to practice these exercises on your own, you can find a PDF with many of the patterns and concepts that we talked about in this video on there in a couple of different keys, so I'll transpose them for B flat and E flat instruments. And we will be putting out a series of backing tracks or play-along tracks that cover the 2-5-1 at a slow tempo, so as to be able to allow anyone who wants to play the scales and arpeggios over those chord progressions and get a feel for it, and also at a more medium swing tempo so that you can start to use some of these ideas and really start to improvise with them. All right, gang, if you like this video, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you are looking for lessons in jazz improvisation or in any number of a bunch of musical instruments, you can find us on our website at www.ridgewoodschoolofmusic.com, or you can send us an email at ridgewoodschoolofmusic@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to set you up with a great teacher for what you're looking for. All right, gang, I hope you had fun with that. Have a wonderful time practicing, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.